Once again, I am Roseto Orquesta and welcome to Pantas Malaya. So for today's lesson, we will talk about or we'll discuss about the structural principles. This is from the book written by Barbara von Hale and Larry Goldberg. So this is in relation to business logic. So from business roles to business logic. So in a business, there are different business roles. Those business roles will be applied in a business logic if you are creating a business system, a software, or an electronic system that where we could embed the business rules as business logic. So a business logic is simply a set of business rules represented as atomic element of conditions leading to conclusions, and as such business logic represents business thinking about the way important business decisions are made. So we have these business rules, then from that business rules we develop a system, and with that system we implemented the rules as business logic so that we can come up to a decision. Okay, so with the book written by von Hale and Goldberg, there are 7 principles. So we have the tabular shape, the heading, the cells, the row, the conclusions, conditions, and connections. These 7 principles are what we are going to talk about today. So let's jump into the first principle. So this is the first principle. The fundamental structure of a decision model is called a rule family and has 2 dimensions. One dimension is the heading and the other dimension is the body, or informally, the basic element in a decision model resembles a 2-dimensional table. So as you can see in the picture, in the example. So that is our model, and that the heading 1, heading 2, 3, and 4, that is the principle 1, or specifically talks about the principle 1. So now that the principle 1 talks about these headings. One dimension is the heading and the other dimension is the body. So this is the first dimension, the heading, and this body here is the second dimension. So 2 dimension. The first dimension is the headings, the second dimension is the body of the table. So it represents it resembles a 2-dimensional table. Okay, so that is the fundamental structure of a decision model. This is where we plot our roles and condition and conclusion for the decision model. So the second principle is the heading of a role family is a set of fact types, or informally the column. The labels represent different kinds of information. So the previous slides talks that the first principle is about the heading and the body, the 2-dimensional table. That is the basic structure of a decision model. Now in this principle 2, it talks about the heading. So it says that the heading should be a fact types, or informally the column labels. So these are the labels. These are the labels. Okay. For example, the person years at current employer, person number of jobs in past 5 years, person employment history. So these 3 are the column labels, or these are what we call fact types. So this represents different kinds of information. The first column label or fact types give information about the person's current employer, current years in years at current employer. So like if the person is employed, and then how many years has it covers as an employer, as an employee to that business. Okay, that's the information. Whereas in the second column, it talks about the number of jobs in the past 5 years. So did that employee jumps from jobs to jobs to jobs? So how many jobs it has for the past 5 years, or that kind of information. And then the third one is about the person employment history. So did that employee has a good history of employment or bad history of employment? So what is a fact? A common definition of fact is a piece of information, so like for example a statistic or a statement of truth, based on the definition of fact in Carta. So a fact type is simply the general classification of a fact or piece of information, not the piece of information itself. Okay. Now the answer to this, or the content in the body for person, years, and current employers. For example, we put 6 here, so that number 6 is now the fact. Then let's say for example person number of jobs in the past 5 years. See, the person has 3 different jobs, and then the person employment history is, say, good. So the 6, the 3, and the good are now the piece of information. That is the fact. Which regards to the fact types or the column labels. Okay, so that is the principle number 2. Again, the principle number 1, it talks about the two-dimensional table structure, that the fundamental structure of a decision model is it has heading and it has a body. And then in principle number 2, a heading should be of a set of fact types. Okay. And then principle number 3, the content of each cell of a role family is an atomic logical expression conforming to the heading, or informally each cell is a logical expression with operators and operands. So if we look at this from the previous table, we now included a content on the body. So what it says in the principle number 3 is that each cell is a logical expression with operators and operands. So in here, this is the operator, is less than, is less than. These are the operators, is less than, is greater than. And then the operands are this one, this 3, this 8. So this is operator, this is operator, this is operand. Okay, so we might say for example is less than 1, so we can convert this into less than 1, this to less than 1, this is less than 1, this is greater than no, this is less than 3, and this is greater than 8. So it's good. And this one to equal to 4. Okay, so as you can see, the greater than, the less than, and the is, those are what we called operators, logical operators, logical expressions. Okay, logical expressions with operators and operands. Okay. Okay, so as a whole, so for example this is less than 1 is what we call the logical expression. Like this is greater than 8 is a complete example of logical expression. Then, for example, is good, it is also a complete example of logical expression. Why is it that those are an example of logical expression? Because it has operators and operands. So the operators is the symbol less than or greater than or the equal, and then the operands are, say for example, the right and left operand. So for example, 2 is greater than 1, so this 2 and this 1 are the operands, the left and right operand. 1 is less than 2, so left and right operand. Or is good, so person is person employment is equal to good. So okay, that is the principle number 3. So the content or the body should be composed of operators and operands. That makes a logical expression which conforms to the column label or the fact types or the heading. Okay, so with that we have a complete set of structure of a decision model. So from an empty table, two-dimensional table with heading and the content or columns and rows. Then that of the principle number 2, that the heading should have a fact types label, a piece of information, and then that of the body should be in a logical expression which composed of operators and operands. Now we have the principle number 4. The populated cells playing the role of conditions infer the corresponding populated cells playing the role of a conclusion. Or informally, each row represents conditions leading to conclusions the way business leaders want or need it to be. So the principle number 2 talks about the conditions which infer the which infer to the conclusion. So, to simplify, the thought is that the conditions under this first column and the conditions under this second column are the reasons or the basis of the content of the third column here. So the answer of this column and the answer of this column will be the reason to the conclusion. Say for example in this table or in this structure. So the person requested loan amount is less than 100,000. Okay. Then person secured amount is nothing. Then the answer is accepted. But if in the condition the person requested loan is greater than 100,000 and then the person secured amount is 0, then it is rejected. So as you can see, through this condition and this condition, the answer to these two conditions will be the basis of this conclusion. Okay, that is the principle number 4. So all content or all value or all results posted in your conclusions are basing on your conditions. Okay, so there is no conclusions that does not conform or that does not base on the conditions. So from conditions led to conclusions. So if the both conditions of the requested loan and the person secured amount is good, so shall we say good, then it might have a good conclusion. But if the conditions is bad, and the second condition is also bad, then it would have a bad conclusion. So a condition has a negative and a positive, so it might have either negative or positive conclusion depending on the role of the business. Okay, so that is principle number 4. So example of a conditional competition. So there are two types of conclusions: a conditional competition conclusions and non-conditional competition. So the first one is the conditional competition conclusions. So say for example this one: if the person salary grade is less than 5 and the person years in the company is less than 3, then the annual bonus should be computed as this: the salary amount of that person multiplied by 0.05% out of the monthly salary. So but if the employee, the salary grade of that employee is greater than 5, okay, greater than 5, and then the person years in the company, working in the company, is greater than 2, it will be computed, the annual bonus amount should be computed with the person's current salary multiplied by 0.10% of that monthly salary. Okay, that is the condition. So conditional competition conclusion. So we have two different sets of conditions. Now the unconditional competition conclusion. So this is an example. Okay, so there is no conditions. All credit rating will be computed as like this. So there is no such conditions here. It is just said that all persons' credit rating will be computed the same. Like person total income over the past 5 years plus the person anticipated total income over the next 5 years divided by the proprietary number. So there is no condition. Unconditional competition conclusion. So there is nothing here, just a conclusion. These are the two examples of the principle number 4. But these unconditional competition conclusion rarely exist. Yes, it's always has a condition, preconditions before it comes up to the conclusion. Now the principle number 5. So a role family has only one conclusion fact type, or informally there is only one conclusion column. So it always, or normally, so maybe it could be somehow there would be two conclusion table, two conclusion column, but most likely it is always one conclusion. This is the conclusion: person likelihood of defaulting alone. That is one column conclusion. But in the conditions it has 3. The first is person credit rating from outside credit bureau. The second condition is the person credit card balance. The third condition is person education loan balance. So it has 3 conditions, but it leads only to one conclusion. So that is the principle number 5. A role family has only one conclusion fact type, or informally there is only one conclusion column. And then for the principle number 6, so this is the second to the last principle. Principle number 6 is divided to 4 sub-principles. So the first sub-principle is a role family must have at least one role pattern. So this sub-principle requires that there be at least one of set of populated condition cells that logically infer the corresponding conclusion cells. So at least one role pattern. So say for example in this table we have 3 conclusions, right? the person's credit rating, the credit balance, and the education loan balance. So out of these three, we should have at least one condition populated. Say for example, we populate this credit rating from outside credit bureau conditions before we can supply a conclusion. Okay, so we have to at least fill up this first condition so that we can come up to a conclusion. That is the principle 6A, or the first sub-principle of principle 6. Now the principle 6B, or the second sub-principle, it says that roll pattern fully empty condition key principle, or the whole condition key of a roll pattern can be empty if there is only one roll pattern in the roll family. So this can be empty if it only has one roll pattern. The whole condition key of a roll pattern can be empty if there is only one roll pattern. So if we go back here in this example, the unconditional, we only have one condition pattern. See, it is only one column. This is why we could leave this empty and proceed to conclusions or conclusion. That is what the principle 6B talks about. Now in principle 6, or the third sub-principle of principle 6, roll pattern partially empty condition key principle. The condition key of a roll pattern cannot be partially empty unless the whole condition key is empty. Okay, so this one, we leave this empty because it is only one condition pattern. But in this example, we cannot leave these two empty and have this column populated and produce a conclusion. In principle 6A, it says that this principle requires that there be at least one set of populated condition cells that logically infer the corresponding conclusion cells. So we could make a conclusion or a partial conclusion if this column, this condition, the first condition is populated, whereas the second and third condition are not populated. We can make a conclusion, but that is a partial conclusion. That is what the principle 6A talks about. So we can do that, but in principle 6C, or the third principle, it says the condition key of a roll pattern cannot be partially empty unless the whole condition key is empty. So we should not leave this empty and have a conclusion. If we leave this two empty, we might as well leave this first condition empty. So that makes it the whole condition is empty and not having a conclusion. So the principle 6D, or the fourth principle, a conclusion in a roll pattern should not depend on a partial condition key. So addresses a normal form for the decision model and implies that each conclusion in a roll pattern is fully functional dependent on the entire condition key. So a conclusion roll pattern should not depend on a partial condition key. So this conclusion table here should not depend only to this first column condition, but it should depend on the whole condition columns, the first, second, and third, so that we can create, before we can produce a conclusion. It should not only affected by the first condition, and so it should be affected by these three conditions, for example, the credit rating, the credit card balance, and the loan balance. So these three should affect your conclusion, not just the first condition, or not just the second condition, or not just the third condition. So that is the fourth sub-principle of principle 6. Okay. Now the last principle is principle 7. A role family has an inferential relationship with another role family when the conclusion fact type of the latter serves as a condition fact type in the former, or informally, the conclusion of one role family may serve as a condition in another role family. This principle number 7 has two sub-principle. So the first sub-principle is a role family cannot have an empty conclusion seal. A role family cannot have an empty conclusion seal because the conclusion fact type is the glue that ties together inferential related role families. So we could not have an empty conclusion. This conclusion here, this should not be empty. Not empty. It should be filled, because this conclusion is the glue that binds these three conditions. Okay, that is the role family empty conclusion cell principle of principle number 7. Then the second sub-principle of principle 7, it talks that role pattern empty conclusion cell principle. So a role pattern cannot have empty conclusion cells. The previous sub-principle required that no conclusion cells in a role family be empty. So in generalization, say for example, if we look back to the general description of principle number 7, it says a role family has an inferential relationship with another role family when the conclusion fact type of a latter serves as a condition fact type in the former. So informally, the conclusion of one role family may serve as a condition to another role family. So if we take that as an example, if we make an example, say this condition here, the person credit rating from outside credit bureau, the result of this condition might be the basis of this second condition. So whatever the result of this first condition will be used here in the second condition, and if whatever the result of the second condition will be the basis of this third condition, and that the result of that condition will be the basis of this conclusion. So this conclusion now will ties together the three conditions. That is the gist of what the principle number 7 talks about. So this conclusion should not be empty, should not left empty. So okay, so I hope you learned something from this discussion. That's it for today, and if you have clarifications and questions, please write your comment down below, and that's it. Mabuhay.